Hello, my spooky crew, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if this is your first time here. My name is Alex, and this is my little spooky corner of the internet. Truth time, the Conjuring movies are some of my favorite horror movies. And what makes them exceptionally compelling is the whole based on a true story aspect. Why the quotation marks? Movies that are based on a true story are usually loosely based on a true story. Producers and screenwriters often have to take artistic liberties and exaggerate some things in order to make the story more interesting. For example, in The Conjuring 2, the movie was centered around how Ed and Lorraine Warren helped the Hodgson family with the Enfield poltergeist. But Ed and Lorraine weren't the only investigators working on the case. In fact, according to Maurice Grosse, one of the investigators on the Enfield poltergeist case, Ed and Lorraine Warren showed up for a very short time. Ed apparently pulled Grosse aside and said that he could make a lot of money off the case, and Ed was sent away. There's a lot more to the story, and maybe I'll tell you more in the future. So with this in mind, we should expect some things are exaggerated with movies that are based on a true story. So, what's the true story behind the murder trial that became famously known as The Devil Made Me Do It, or The Demon Murder Case, or The Devil in Connecticut? What is the story that inspired The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It? Let's find out. Before we start, be sure to click on that subscribe button, give this video a like, and click on that notification bell so you'll know the next time I upload a new video. First, a disclaimer. Spoiler alert. Since this is based on a true story, I will potentially be spoiling the movie for you. And at the time of this video, the movie isn't out yet, so I don't know what they'll be sticking to and what will change in the movie. So be prepared to be spoiled. So before we could talk about the actual murder trial, we have to start at the beginning. This whole thing started in a small town called Brookfield, Connecticut, and it was a sleepy little town with not much going on. In 1980, 18-year-old Arnie Cheyenne Johnson and his fiancée, 26-year-old Debbie Glatzel, had just acquired a rental property and they went over to start cleaning it. The idea was that Arnie and his mother and his family were going to move into the house with Debbie so that Arnie and Debbie could help take care of his sick mother. But the rental property wasn't in great shape, so they had to clean it. So this is about July 1980. Debbie's brother, 11-year-old David Glatzel, said that when they arrived, there was an old man that started terrorizing him and pushing him. And at first, Arnie and Debbie thought that maybe David was making up the story so he wouldn't have to help clean. And then David said that the old man promised to harm the Glatzel family if they moved into the rental. So I guess at first this apparition appeared to David as like an old man, but then the next time David saw the old man, he had more like beast-like features, like charred skin and uttering Latin and threatening to steal his soul, which of course causes the demon alarm bells to go off. And the rental property itself didn't really give much concern because all they were really hearing was footsteps above them, like in the attic. Debbie and Arnie didn't really think much of it. But soon after, David started having night terrors, and he had unexplained scratches and bruises, and he was starting to act strange. There's some different accounts of this timeline, and it gets a bit confusing, and I'll explain more in a minute. So the family called in a Catholic priest to bless the house, and I think his name was Father Dennis. And of course, it's the 80s, mental health care isn't what it is today. You know, when your 11-year-old son starts acting strange, call in a priest to bless the house. Apparently, this house blessing didn't work. So this was in the Glatzel house that this was all happening. And apparently, Arnie and Debbie didn't even move into the rental property. So because the situation with David was getting worse, Arnie and Debbie actually moved in to the Glatzel household. So before, Arnie and Debbie were living with Arnie's family. Then they got the rental property, and then they moved into the Glatzel household where they needed help with David. Told you it's confusing. And from what I could see, from what I've read and seen with different interviews and newspaper articles, it looks like Arnie and Debbie never actually moved into the rental. Besides the footsteps up above, they thought that the house was evil, so they didn't move in. So this old man beast demon started to be called the Beast. Whenever David was getting like convulsions and getting attacked at night, apparently David would put his head down, and then when he put his head back up, his face was all distorted, so they knew that the Beast was present. Eventually, David's visions and odd behavior started happening in the daytime as well. And according to the Glatzels, David was being choked by unseen hands and he was being beaten. David started hissing, growling, and reciting passages from the Bible, as well as John Milton's Paradise Lost. And David was also speaking in different voices. So members of the family actually had to start taking shifts, especially at night, to watch David because he would have these spasms and convulsions and stop breathing and possibly hurt himself. And Arnie was one of the people staying up with him and making sure that he was okay. So Arnie was working during the day as a tree landscaper, and then he'd be up all night trying to deal with David. So I imagine he was tired. About 12 days after the original incident, which I'm guessing is when David first encountered this beast demon, so Father Dennis, the priest that may have been called in to bless the house, called Ed and Lorraine Warren to investigate. Now, I've also read accounts that it was the Glatzel family that called Ed and Lorraine Warren, but in an interview on Ed and Lorraine Warren's official YouTube channel, this is an interview from like the late 80s, or early 90s, long time ago, she said that it was a priest named Father Dennis that had called her. So the Warrens come into the scene and they learn the Glatzel story, and they concluded that David was possessed by multiple demons. I think they said about 43 demons total. According to my research, David went through 3 exorcisms. Lorraine swears that David levitated in the air and even had demonstrated precognition abilities and predicted the murder that Arnie Johnson would commit. During one of David's exorcisms, Arnie apparently coerced one of the demons to possess him, and he told the demon to leave his little buddy alone and take me. And again, Arnie was working all day and then staying up all night to deal with David, so he probably wasn't in his right mind. Even in my neutral stance on demons and demonology, even I know better to not invite a spirit to just come into me. That's not a smart idea. What's also interesting is that after Arnie did this, when the story was covered on the show A Haunting, Arnie said that one of the demons attacked him by taking control of his car and running it into a tree. So after the car accident, Arnie went back to the old rental property and examined the well that supposedly housed the demon. By the way, somewhere in this, it was believed that the mother and the daughter that lived in the rental property before Arnie and Debbie had rented it, I guess they were into witchcraft, and the well in the back housed the demon, and the story's a mess. So Arnie looks into the old well where this houses the demon. I mean, yes, go to the well that houses this evil thing, and he looks down into the well and he makes eye contact with the demon, and apparently this was his last completely lucid moment before the murder happened. The Warrens were not happy with this, and apparently they had even warned Arnie to not make contact with the demon or make eye contact with the demon, because then he would become full-on possessed. If he was believing, or the family was believing, what the Warrens were telling them, they completely went off script and did his own thing. I mean, if I were the Warrens, I wouldn't be happy either. And then, of course, then in the midst of all this, David wasn't getting better. Things were getting really bad, and in October of 1980, the Warrens actually contacted the Brookfield police and told them that the situation was getting dangerous. According to Lorraine, she was expecting this to become violent at some point. At this point, Arnie and Debbie decided it was time to move out of the Glatzel house and into their own place. It's like, hey, peace out, we're out of here. So Debbie got a job at a dog groomer, which was owned by a man named Alan Bono. Alan Bono also would be Arnie and Debbie's landlord. So apparently, from my understanding, could be incorrect, they lived above the groomer, the dog kennel, and that's where the apartments were. So Alan Bono, I think, lived either across the hall from them or right next door. But anyway, they all lived in these units above the dog grooming business. Not too long after Debbie and Arnie got the apartment above the dog grooming place, Debbie started to notice that Arnie was showing the same behavior as David. So Arnie would also growl and hiss, he would go into a trance-like state, and then he would have no memory of what had just happened. And I guess Arnie was also attacking Debbie too. I think this was according to his sister Wanda, that Arnie would also like beat up Debbie sometimes, but then he wouldn't remember it and he would go out of his like beast-like state. So I imagine Debbie is probably thinking, crap, my man is possessed too. Let's get to the murder. On February 16th, 1981, Arnie called out sick from work. He was having some stomach issues and he wasn't feeling well. He was not in his best state. He went to go see Debbie at the dog groomer downstairs. His sister Wanda and Debbie's 9-year-old cousin Mary were also there, and Alan Bono took the group to lunch. So they all went to this cafe to drink, and he started drinking heavily. Apparently Alan Bono was kind of a lone wolf, so to speak. He was lonely, he drank a lot. I think he just appreciated the company. And he also insisted that Arnie and Debbie drink too. And apparently Arnie and Alan were buddies, like they would drink together a lot and, things were cool. And so after lunch, the group went to a pet shop to get supplies, and then they went back to the dog grooming business, the kennel. I'm just gonna call it the kennel from this point. Arnie went to the apartment to lay down, so he went upstairs. Judy Glatzel, David and Debbie's mom, called Debbie and told her that something was wrong and to get out of the apartment, get out of the kennel, get out immediately. Something wasn't right. When all this is happening, Alan Bono was also at the kennel and he was still drinking. So 5 o'clock somewhere hadn't ended for him yet. So Debbie couldn't leave work right away, but she assured her mother, Judy Glatzel, that she would take everyone over for dinner and everyone would get out. But Alan Bono wanted the group to stay for dinner. And so here's where the details get fuzzy. Debbie took Mary and Wanda, Mary, her cousin, Wanda, Arnie's sister, took them to get pizza, but she said she would be back quickly. And then it seemed that Debbie was also sensing that something wasn't right, but also her mother's phone call may have freaked her out. They all get pizza, they come back. At this point, Bono was completely drunk, like beyond intoxicated at this point. And Debbie was worried that if Bono had dinner in Arnie and Debbie's apartment, he would pass out there and they couldn't get rid of him. So she's like, well, let's have dinner in your apartment. So they all go up to Alan Bono's apartment, put the pizza down, and I guess Arnie was there, but Arnie wasn't there. This is okay. Here's why the details are fuzzy. So there's a story that was told to the police officers before the Warrens got involved and before this hit headlines. And then there was another version of the story that came out after the lawyer wanted to use the possession defense. So the story changed there. But then they couldn't use the possession defense, so the story's changed again. This is where the confusion is coming from. This is my little summary of what may or may not have happened. Debbie and the rest of the crew, Arnie may have been there, may not have been there. Bono had become belligerent, like he was becoming a problem, and so the group was like, all right, it's time to leave. We need to leave. But then Bono was blocking the way out of his apartment. So Mary and Wanda decide, okay, well, we're gonna run out. Bono is able to grab Mary's arm and he wouldn't let her go. So Arnie comes in, he may have come from the other apartment, he may have been in the same room, and he told Bono to let Mary go. Mary gets away and runs to the car. Somehow at this point, the debacle in Alan Bono's apartment moved down to the grass outside of the dog kennel, the grooming business. So it was reported that at this point, Arnie had 2 different voices coming out of him. He was growling, hissing, he was starting to act like the beast again. And it turned into like, I'm going to beat you up, it turned into this really really obscene, obnoxious event at this point. So Wanda is trying to pull Arnie away from Bono. Debbie is standing in the middle, trying to mitigate the situation, like trying to calm the 2 men down. Arnie gets out a 5-inch pocket knife and stabs Alan Bono in the chest. I've read that it was 4 times in the chest. I read it was a few times in the chest and once in the stomach. I've heard it was only like 2 times, 4 times, 3 times. Pick a number. Alan Bono is stabbed. Arnie manages to get away. He slips out, and Bono dies a few hours later in the hospital. And supposedly Debbie and Wanda didn't actually see Arnie stab Alan. So Arnie was found about 2 miles away. I want to say like 2 miles away, an hour or 2 later. And he was arrested. This is the crazy part. This was the very first murder to have ever happened in Brookfield, Connecticut. The first murder in history. So the day after the murder, Lorraine Warren contacts the police and tells them that this isn't Arnie's fault. She said that Arnie was possessed at the time that he committed the murder. The Warrens also fueled quite the media frenzy that surrounded this case. Like, they contacted the media, made sure that it made worldwide headlines. Even the Warrens' agents had promised movie deals, books, and interviews. Like, this would all happen and soon follow. So it became a media circus, partially thanks to the Warrens. I mean, a man stabbing another man is not news, but when you toss in "the devil made me do it" spice into it, it becomes a really interesting story. So Arnie's trial started on October 28th, 1981. So Arnie's lawyer, like I mentioned, decided to run with this possession idea of saying, hey, this isn't his fault, the devil made him do it. His lawyer's name was Martin Manila, and Manila was getting calls from all over the world about this case. And he even went to England to talk to 2 lawyers that had similar cases. But those cases did not go to trial. Manila also wanted to fly in exorcism specialists and even subpoena the priests who oversaw David's exorcisms. So Arnie entered a plea of not guilty by reason of demonic possession. The judge, Robert Callahan, rejected Arnie's plea and the possession defense. So his possession could not even be a factor in the trial. And so Callahan said that there was no way that this defense could be used because there's no way to scientifically prove it and no evidence to support it. Let's be honest, he's right. So Manila decided to say that Arnie was acting in self-defense. What I found interesting too is in one of the original, I want to say it was a newspaper article or a documented interview, Debbie Glatzel had said to her father, "Daddy, you know how Arnie gets when he drinks." But then the Warrens say that Arnie was just such a sweet man and he would never do anything like this. But then we hear, "But Daddy, you know how Arnie gets when he drinks." So that tells me something too. And this was way before the possession defense was even thrown in. So this was like early. This was like within hours of Arnie getting arrested. The case was presented as self-defense. The jury deliberated over 3 days for 15 hours. And Arnie was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter. And this was on November 24th, 1981. A little less than a month after they started going to trial. And Arnie was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, but he only served 5 years. He and Debbie Glatzel actually got married while he was still incarcerated. And they're still married to this day, from what I can tell. You might be wondering what happened to the demon that supposedly possessed Arnie. In Gerald Brittle's book, The Devil in Connecticut, he said that the diocese in Canada intervened and they did a proper exorcism on Arnie. I guess the priests that oversaw David's exorcism didn't do a thorough job. Now, my question is, where did the demon or demons, because there was 43, where did they all come from? I read that the Warrens blamed the previous tenants of the rental for the activity because they were into witchcraft. I don't know about that, but nah. So this is an incredible story. How true is it? So when The Devil in Connecticut book was republished in 2006, David Glatzel and his brother Carl Jr. sued Gerald Brittle and the publishers for invasion of privacy, libel, and intentional afflictions of emotional distress. So Carl claims that David was mentally ill at the time. So when all of this was happening, David was mentally ill. And I guess some specialists also said that David had a learning disability. Again, it's the 1980s. What is a learning disability back then? And also David's father, Carl Sr., claimed that he never said that his son was possessed. And of course, psychiatrists that were looking at David's case today also say that he wasn't possessed, but he also had a learning disability. And according to Carl Jr. and David, they also said that Ed and Lorraine Warren told the family that they were going to make up this story. And so they accused the Warrens of making up the story to exploit their family and profit from their pain and suffering. And so here's also what's really messed up, if it's true. Carl Jr. claims that the Warrens told the family that if they went along with this, they would make a ton of money and they would become millionaires and they would be able to help Arnie get out of prison. If this is true, this is really messed up. I'm not saying it is or isn't because I don't know. So from what I read, Arnie got himself out of prison thanks to his good behavior and being a model prisoner. He got his GED, he took college classes, and he took the time behind bars to get his life together. And according to Gerald Brittle, the demon still haunted David and Arnie. So even though he wasn't possessing them anymore, this entity was still haunting these two individuals. And Gerald Brittle alleges that the demon haunted Arnie while he was in prison. By the way, the family only got $2,000 at the end, which inflation was probably a lot more money than it is today, but still, when you compare the numbers of how much Gerald Brittle and the Warrens made from the case, the Glatzels and Arnie probably could have used a few more bucks, because it's their story. I'm hoping that they do get a little bit more money from the Conjuring 3, but we'll see. So Lorraine stuck to her story and said that she, Ed, and 6 other priests agreed that David was possessed. And I think Lorraine said something to the effect of she was confused by the allegations that her and Ed made up the story. So while the Diocese of Connecticut confirmed that they were helping David through a difficult time, they did not confirm any exorcisms took place, and they didn't confirm anything about possession. And Carl Jr. said that the media circus, the books, and the made-for-TV movie, The Demon Murder, with Kevin Bacon, forced him to drop out of school, he lost friends, and he lost business opportunities. And also, I should mention the book, The Devil in Connecticut, also made Carl Jr. seem like a bad guy. And so Gerald Brittle claims that he wrote the book because the family wanted the story told, and it was based on the claims made by Ed and Lorraine Warren. So he was basically trying to say, hey, I just told the story. I just told it. I didn't make anything up. I just told the story. After Arnie got out of prison, it seemed like life kind of got back to normal for him a little bit. Meh. So this is a sensational story. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on too when it comes to like media reports and videos and articles and books. I mean, there's so much out there, and they're all just a little bit different, which tells me like they're like stories change, which would have been true since, you know, the lawyer went through a couple of tactics to try to get Arnie found not guilty. I mean, demon possession, self-defense, it's a mess. I'll be curious to see how this all plays out in The Conjuring 3. So what do you think of the story? Let me know in the comments. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and click on that notification bell. And feel free to share this video with your friends and family who also enjoy the spooky stuff and the Conjuring series and the cases of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next round.